St. Augustine Commentary on the Gospel of John, chapter 21, verse 12 to 19, Tractatus 123. With this third manifestation of himself by the Lord to his disciples after his resurrection, the Gospel of the blessed Apostle John is brought to a close, of which we have already lectured through the earlier part as we were able, on to the place where it is related that 153 fishes were taken by the disciples to whom he showed himself, and for all they were so large, yet were not the nets broken. What follows we have now to take into consideration and to discuss as the Lord enables us and as the various points may appear to demand. When the fishing was over, Jesus said unto them, Come and dine. And none of those who sat down dared to ask him, Who are you? Knowing that it was the Lord. If then they knew, what need was there to ask? And if there was no need, wherefore is it said, They dare not, as if there were need, but from some fear or other they dared not? The meaning here therefore is, so great was the evidence of the truth that Jesus himself had appeared to these disciples, that not one of them dared not merely to deny, but even to doubt it. For had any of them doubted it, he ought certainly to have asked. In this sense, therefore, it was said, no one dared to ask him, Who are you? As if it were, no one dared to doubt that it was he himself. And Jesus came and took bread, and gave them, and fish likewise. We are likewise told here, you see, on what they dined. And of this dinner we also will say something that is sweet and salutary, if we too are made by him to partake of the food. It is related above that these disciples, when they came to the land, saw a fire of coals laid, and a fish laid thereon, and bread. Here we are not to understand that the bread also was laid upon the coals, but only to supply they saw. And if we repeat this verb in the place where it ought to be supplied, the whole may be read thus: They saw coals laid and fish laid thereon, and they saw bread. Or rather in this way, they saw coals laid and fish laid thereon, they saw also bread. At the Lord's command they likewise brought of the fishes which they themselves had caught. And although their doing so might to be actually stated by the historian, yet there has been no silence in regard to the Lord's command. For he says, Bring up the fishes which you have now caught. And when we have such certainty that he gave the order, will any suppose that they failed to obey it? Of this, therefore, the Lord prepared the dinner for these his 7 disciples, namely of the fish which they had seen laid upon the coals, with an addition thereto from those which they had caught, and of the bread which we are told with equal distinctness that they had seen. The fish roasted is Christ having suffered. He himself also is the bread that comes down from heaven. Chapter 6, verse 41. With him is incorporated the Church in order to the participation in everlasting blessedness. For this reason it is said, Bring up the fish which you have now caught, that all of us who cherish this hope may know that we ourselves through that septenary number of disciples, whereby our universal community may in this passage be understood as symbolized, partake in this great sacrament, and are associated in the same blessedness. This is the Lord's dinner with his own disciples, and herewith John, although having much besides that he might say of Christ, brings his gospel with profound thought and an eye to important lessons to a close. For here the Church, such as it will be hereafter, among the good alone, is signified by the draught of 153 fishers. And to those who so believe and hope and love, there is demonstrated by this dinner their participation in such supereminent blessedness. This was now, he says, the third time that Jesus showed himself to his disciples, after that he was risen from the dead. And this we are to refer not to the manifestations themselves, but to the death, that is to say, taking the first day, when he rose again, and the second, 8 days after, when the disciple Thomas saw and believed, and the third on this day, when he so acted in connection with the fishers, although how many days afterwards it was that he did so, we are not told. For on that first day he was seen more than once, as is shown by the collated testimonies of all the evangelists. But as we have said, it is in accordance with the days that his manifestations are to be calculated, making this the third. For that manifestation is to be reckoned the first, and all one and the same, as included in one day, however often and to however many he showed himself on the day of his resurrection. The second 8 days afterwards, and this the third, and thereafter as often as he pleased on to the 40th day, when he ascended into heaven, although all of them have not been recorded in Scripture. So when they had dined, he said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? He said unto him, Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said unto him, Feed my lambs. He said to him again, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He said unto him, Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said unto him, Feed my lambs. He said unto him the third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was grieved because he said unto him the third time, Do you love me? And he said unto him, Lord, you know all things, you know that I love you. He said unto him, Feed my sheep. Verily, verily, I say unto you, when you were young, you girded yourself and walked whither you would. But when you shall be old, you shall stretch forth your hands, and another shall gird you and carry you whither you will not. And this he spoke, signifying by what death he should glorify God. Such was the end reached by that denier and lover. Elated by his presumption, frustrated by his denial, cleansed by his weeping, approved by his confession, crowned by his suffering. This was the end he reached, to die with a perfected love for the name of him with whom, by a perverted forwardness, he had promised to die. He would do when strengthened by his resurrection what in his weakness he promised prematurely. For the needful order was that Christ should first die for Peter's salvation, and then that Peter should die for the preaching of Christ. The boldness thus begun by human temerity was an utter inversion of the order that had been instituted by the truth.